to Catching Up with Katy. I'm your state senator, Katy O'Connor Ives, and on today's show we have a very special guest with us. We have Congresswoman Niki Tsongas, and I very much look forward to a robust conversation with our Congresswoman. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. And here on HC Media, we literally have Niki in the House, which is your Twitter handle, and you're incredibly accessible through social media and here in our district, so thank you very much for joining us.
Well, Niki in the House is glad to be on Catching Up with Katy.
Thank you so very much. And we're so glad to have you as our Congresswoman, and I know that your district expands, including many different cities, and crosses 3 different counties, and that's pretty amazing.
It's a big district. It goes from Haverhill in the east, it's the easternmost point of the district, to Gardner in the west, and then includes all the communities along the New Hampshire border, and swings down then to Clinton and Marlborough, both new additions to the district as a result of redistricting, but also has always included for decades now, Concord, Acton, Harvard, Stowe, many of the communities, those are the southern communities. So it's very, very diverse, includes a lot of small to mid-sized cities. If we think of Haverhill, Methuen, Lawrence, Lowell, Fitchburg, and Gardner, as well as Clinton has a lot of aspects of a city, though not really in terms of its population, as well as Marlborough, and all the diverse constituencies of those cities, each very distinct, have very distinct identities, very distinct composition, and then the more traditional New England towns that orient more towards Boston. So the Merrimack Valley plus, the Merrimack Valley is really the heart of it, the Merrimack Valley plus, but a great district and one I've been so proud to represent.
And I know that your offices provide constituent services on a variety of matters that residents might not even know about.
Well, I think it's the bottom line responsibility of a member of Congress. Even as people sort of are dismayed at what they see in Washington, we can always make a difference back home. And most particularly in terms of working with constituents who have a problem with the federal government. So, for example, with Social Security or Medicare, if you're making a trip and you need a visa or a new passport, we can often help expedite that. We often get people coming to us at the last minute who need some help, and we're always happy to do that. Veterans, obviously, we're a very important resource to veterans. We have the responsibility of nominating young people to the service academies. So as young people are making their way through high school and have an interest in serving our country and going to one of the service academies, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, West Point, whatever it may be, that's my responsibility to nominate to those academies, and something that I really enjoy doing as we see these very able young people who want to serve their country. So a whole host of ways in which we can make a difference, and work very hard to do that. To reach out to people, we have office hours throughout the district. So we're here in Haverhill on Tuesdays from 9 to 11 at the Senior Center, but we also do office hours in Lawrence. We do office hours in Fitchburg. We do them in Marlborough. So we do them across the district, even though the main office is in Lowell. It happens to be sort of the center, the geographic center of the district.
And you also have Congress on your corner, which is another special opportunity.
Well, that's something I instituted when I was first elected. It gives me an opportunity to go to a community, let the community know I'm going to be there. We'll often reach out via the telephone to let people know I'll be there, or through local media. And we invite anybody to come and have a chance to talk with me individually. It's really about an individual one-on-one conversation with somebody who has an issue they want to press me on, or support me on, or if they have, again, a problem with the federal government, we can begin that process. So I think I've done well over 50. I've been to Haverhill many times over, and always get a good attendance when I make my way here. Generally, we've done it at the library, but we look for places that are accessible. And it helps me shape my response to what's happening in Washington, to learn about a problem, get a different take on how we might best solve it. I can remember when I was soon elected and we were confronting the beginnings of what became known as the Great Recession, and I would have people come to me who were talking about losing their jobs and just the difficulties with their mortgages. And so I was alerted early on to a looming challenge that we were going to confront as a country. And now, as we've worked our way out of it, I tend to hear more hopeful stories, but not always so. So It's a challenge we have, but it's the Congress on your corner that gives me the chance to really learn about how these things are impacting people in their daily lives.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I find it very amazing because you're in the district so often, but then you have so many responsibilities in Washington, D.C., and you have a very prominent role in the Armed Services Committee and do work that actually affects the district that's related to manufacturing.
Well, one of the things people always ask me is how much time are you in the district and how much time are you in Washington? I think many people presume that we really are captive of Washington and we're there weeks on weeks, and that's really not the case. We're there 3 days a week and then back in our districts for the remainder of the week. So 4 days here, 3 days there. Sometimes a little longer there, sometimes more here. But it gives me a chance here to do what we were talking about, a Congress on your corner or visiting companies or just connecting in every way with the district. But when in Washington, I am on the Armed Services Committee. I was fortunate to be appointed to that committee immediately upon being elected. My predecessor, Marty Meehan, had been on it, but there was a need for a Massachusetts representative. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of active duty bases, but the ones that we do are very important. If we think of Hanscom or Natick Soldier Systems, which are the ones closest to this district, we have many companies that do work with the Defense Department, mm-hmm. often small businesses, but also some of the larger ones that are a key to how we protect our country. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in the Air Force, so I had a familiarity with military life and felt that was relevant to service. And I felt that was a committee that needed some diversity. Not a lot of women were on it. So mm-hmm. I sought it out and was fortunate to be appointed to it. With the turnover in Washington, more than people think. When I was first elected in 2007, I went as number 435 because there are 435 members of Congress. I'm now number 180. And so that reflects a huge turnover, people both leaving office or being defeated. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I've risen up in the ranks very quickly. So I'm now the 10th in seniority on a very large, on the Democratic side, mm-hmm. Which positions me to have real influence, and influence I feel it's important to exercise. And it's a great committee in this bipartisan, not particularly a bipartisan era. Mm. It is a committee that has a great tradition of bipartisanship because we all understand our fundamental responsibility is how we protect our country, in doing so to honor those who help us do that and make sure that our servicemen and women have all the adequate equipment that they need and all the proper training they need to be successful and as safe as possible when defending this country.
That's hugely important, and I serve on the Small Business Committee at the state level, and I was particularly interested in the connection that you make between the work of the Department of Defense and potential manufacturing opportunities in the United States with the Make It in America initiative.
Well, I was I'm fortunate to represent New Balance in Lawrence, which has made a real commitment to making it in America, manufacturing here in this country, and obviously a very important company for Lawrence itself, but also to Massachusetts if we look at the new headquarters that's in Boston, right along the Mass Pike, quite a remarkable facility. And many years ago, in 1944, as we were fighting World War II, something called the Berry Amendment was passed, which basically said, if our soldiers are going to war in our behalf, they need to be wearing American-made equipment. And that has been the case. But an exception was created for training shoes a number of years ago. So as new recruits were coming in, volunteering to come in and serve our country, they were issued a voucher which allowed them to buy any kind of shoe that they wanted. I understood at the time there wasn't a lot of choice for shoes, and you wanted to be sure that whatever shoe a new recruit was wearing was good for their foot and allowed them to go through a very arduous training and protect their feet in the process. But over time, more and more companies were willing to invest in a solely American-made shoe, and New Balance really took the lead on that effort. And it wasn't simple to find component parts for their shoes that could be manufactured across this country, but they did it. And so I have really been a strong advocate for reinstituting the Berry Amendment around training shoes so that New Balance can compete to provide those shoes. We've had some success. the military has come around and been willing to sort of unilaterally make that change, but they've been dragging their feet a bit. Two of New Balance's shoes have been tested to see if they meet all the standards, and 2 have passed that test. They're still working on 1. There's another company out in Michigan that's going through the same process. So we want to be sure that our new recruits have access to whatever shoe that's American made that suits their needs, but in doing that, to also support American manufacturing, because it isn't easy, given competitiveness in the globalized economy, to keep all of your manufacturing here in this country. And when you have a company that's willing to do that, I want to support that company, and I especially want to support that company when it's in this district and provides crucial jobs to so many of our citizens.
Exactly. I'm still an eternal optimist when it comes to the potential for either maintaining or growing manufacturing, whether it's in New England or throughout the country, because we know that the quality is there and we care about the impact on workers and the environment, and it's a sustainable form of manufacturing.
It is, and you
important.
see a lot of it. I mean, I'm sure you see it as you travel around. You see a lot of companies that are investing here, staying here, given how highly innovative we are. It tends to be more in the advanced manufacturing sector, which has a higher order or different order of skill set, around which we were talking. Our vocational schools are so important in providing that skill set.
Right.
But it's something we as members of the legislature in whatever body need to be supportive of, and it's great to be able to work with you around that.
Our communities, fortunately, are just natural innovation hubs. So how do we foster that is the question.
That's really true, and we're fortunate to have vocational technical schools, high schools, great community colleges, a great university in UMass Lowell that really is focused on innovation, has been a leader for years in plastics engineering. I mean, that's sort of where it began, and textile engineering, but textile products. But as we've seen under then Chancellor Meehan has really moved ahead and understands the linkages that have to be made across the educational sector, but also the investment in research and development and technology that the university world has to be committed to.
Right. I know that another challenge that we share through our work is the opioid crisis. And I know that efforts have been made at the local level and the state level, but maybe folks don't know about what's been happening at the federal level.
And the federal level, at the federal level, I think all of us sort of have heard these stories and understand the challenge that is emerging and has emerged in our communities and across our states. And that has come back to the federal government, because primarily what we have to do is find resources, invest resources that then can make their way down to the states and the local level. Because more than anything, I think we hear over and over again, is all the great ideas out there and the need to invest in so many aspects of it, but the absence of funding.
Right. So
President Obama had in his budget, I think there will be over $1 billion. And I do think that this is where you'll see bipartisan agreement, that because we're all wrestling with this tragedy in our states, and there will be, this is an area where you'll see, I think, bipartisan willingness to support this investment. I certainly hope so. I've been working with a congressman from Ohio. He and I have worked on a number of fronts, but there is federal dollars out there now, especially through Medicaid and Medicare, that have not been, some of our prisons have not been able to access, really around prevention. And so we've introduced legislation that would make that funding more flexible, so that those who are operating prisons and dealing, obviously, with those who make their way to prison because of their drug addictions, where you could begin to invest better invest in prevention there. And so we'll look for a whole host of ways. I was alarmed when the FDA made a decision to sort of create the parameters around which OxyContin could be prescribed to those 11 years and older. And
right.
Given the great challenge we're confronting, I felt that we needed to raise questions around it. The pharmaceutical company that did the study was a pharmaceutical company that stood to benefit as a producer of OxyContin. So we wrote a letter to the FDA to challenge that decision-making process. The FDA has written back, kind of pushing back on that challenge, so we'll continue to pursue that. And then most recently, there's an agency at the federal level that is sort of looking at best practices and soliciting advice from across the country, and we reached out to a lot of our stakeholders, and they came forward with some good ideas that we then forwarded to that agency. So a lot going on at the federal level, but primarily I think our job is to really support that which is taking place at the state level. And Massachusetts, the governor working with the legislature, I think understands what a challenge it is and is working to find some solutions that make sense.
I appreciate so much your leadership on the area of the prescribing of these powerful narcotics to young people because of their addictive properties. And at the state level, Representative DeZoglio filed a bill that I signed on to, and I gave testimony on that exact subject matter because we're finding that as we're responding to the opioid crisis, so much of it has to do with this gateway situation where people become addicted to these powerful prescription narcotics. When they think a small injury or a dental problem then leads to a very serious addiction.
And that was what I think alarmed me. I think those in the medical profession would say that they want the OxyContin, for example, to be available to young people who are really dealing with horrific illnesses and horrific pain.
Right.
And that's really not where our focus is. Our focus is really on raising the issue you suggested. But I also think there probably need to be follow-on studies. So even if you do prescribe it in a more appropriate setting, are you collecting data that allows you to determine whether or not that young person is then able to move off that drug once it's no longer needed?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly it, because I wonder too, is there a tapering protocol so that people can wean themselves off from these drugs if they need them for a longer period of time in a healthy manner?
Yes, yes.
I also think that having the federal assistance is going to be so helpful when it comes to doing the treatment options that are necessary for the folks that are incarcerated, because that hasn't been the status quo. They've been detoxing in a situation where they're in jail and might not have the clinical supports, and there are some good models now through Sheriff Cousins' office that has a detox center and some other examples that we need to replicate, so thank you for that.
Yes, and we wanted to make this funding, those efforts eligible for this funding. So because it's bipartisan, there's always more hope when you introduce something that has bipartisan support, and my hope is that we will be able to move this forward. Right now our focus is on garnering more bipartisan support so that we can make the case that this is an appropriate vehicle for creating funding for those kinds of programs within prisons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know that another thing that I'm happy about is your leadership on the Natural Resources Committee. And there's an issue that we both share in our districts related to energy challenges and the Kinder Morgan pipeline proposal and all of the competing demands where we know we want to have a diverse energy portfolio and have energy independence, but we also want to make sure that residents' interests are protected and that the natural resources that we have spent limitless resources to ensure, whether it's the Merrimack River or our public lands, remain protected. So I know that you're working on that as well.
Yes, the proposed pipeline really does impact many communities throughout the 3rd District. It starts way out in the western part of the state, but really does impact many. And we've certainly taken the concerns quite seriously. So whether or not they're the environmental impacts that people have been so appropriately raising, or whether or not it's the individual homeowner who is so worried about the impact on the value of their home, but also worried about the health implications of a pipeline or all the different aspects to that pipeline. So what we've done through my office is really insisted that FERC be very transparent and open in the process and be willing to hear constituents' concerns. And I think that one of the things we should all take away from this is the extraordinary impact of citizen involvement. I think at this point the pipeline is far from a done deal, and I think it reflects the extraordinary effort of so many around raising all the appropriate issues. But that being said, there's a process that is ongoing, and we've really weighed in and said, as you do an environmental impact statement, you have to do the most robust one, because there was a choice between a narrower one and one that was more comprehensive. They are engaged in the more comprehensive one. That gives, again, citizens another opportunity for input, which is so important. We've seen where some citizens have not been willing to have surveyors come on their land. And again, that reflects their opposition and deep concern to this pipeline. And I think it's a good thing that at the state level, the DPU is now going to create an opportunity for a hearing around this. At the federal level, I've pushed back on legislative efforts. There was a piece of legislation that was introduced to shortchange the FERC process, to narrow the effort, the opportunity for citizens to have input. I was adamantly against it because I've seen in this instance just how invaluable it's been to raising very important issues. But you're right, the bottom line is that we have to be sure what our challenge is here. Congresswoman Custer in New Hampshire and I and others signed the letters asking FERC to look at the regional challenge as opposed to just the individual state challenge. So we're not doing all this in silos. I think that's an important effort. And then, as you say, a multifaceted approach to our energy needs is really needed. And how we have a balanced approach is important. I've seen in this district the clean energy companies that are out there investing in new technologies, and these are important economic opportunities, but obviously they help wean us from fossil fuels. And so finding the balance is critically important. And we also hear, I hear from individuals who struggle with their bills as they are. So we want the cost to be palatable, and particularly to businesses as we're wanting manufacturing to move forward and our companies able to grow. So it's a tough balancing act, but I think we have to have real data that we can all rely upon. And I think that's why the Attorney General studies was important as well.
That's right. I think a lot of folks often focus on energy production and the cost of energy, but the state has made great strides in the area of conservation as well, which is another job sector that employs a lot of people in Massachusetts.
It does, and renewable energy sources, and so we have to be mindful of the whole.
It's true. It's a funny situation where we know that we want to have energy independence, manufacturing independence, but it comes down to what the balance is. And what a lot of people might not realize is that you're here working in the district to respond to constituent concerns, but at the federal level, you also have a role to play in terms of energy, and whether it's pipeline placement or any other demands that might affect public lands. I think it would be interesting to better understand exactly how involved you are in that process nationwide.
Well, it's true. And for example, on natural resources, we had legislation that was introduced by one of the members that would have basically short-circuited the process again and allowed these pipelines to go through national parks. So as we've seen up here in Massachusetts, the deep commitment we have to our environment and to our national parks, and the alarm that it was raised with this proposed pipeline when it impacted historic lands as well as conservation lands, whatever it may be. Again, something that I was adamantly opposed to. We're not in charge in Washington. The Democrats are not in charge. We are in the minority. So this bill, despite my opposition, and I would guess virtually every Democrat's opposition, this bill made it through the committee. And is likely to will make it through the House of Representatives. The Senate, again, is a much slower body to react in, and I don't know that it will go anywhere, but it's reflective of a philosophy that doesn't place the same value on our federal lands as we do.
I see. With all of these important issues that you have to contend with, a lot of people may wonder, as residents, how is the best way to communicate their opinions to their congresswoman or representative or senator? What's the best way for them to register their feelings on any one particular issue?
They can call me. They can call my office. They can register it through Facebook or through Twitter. They can go online at www.tsongas.house.gov. But I have to tell you that, and we respond. I may not respond, on the phone with people, but every week I get a report on how many calls or letters I've received on any given issue. And we are very committed as an office to responding to people. So I will go through a stack of letters that deals issue by issue with the various calls that we've been receiving, so that people hear from me as to what I think about an issue and why I think it. And I value that dialogue. Again, it's very important. And some things are very esoteric. We'll get maybe 10, 20 people writing in or calling in or whatever it may be. And some things, we get hundreds of people calling in or writing in. And I think my office, we probably send out 3,000 to 4,000 letters a month. So this is very much one of the aspects to a congressional office, is to communicate with citizens. So we do it through letters, we do it through Congress on Your Corner. We also do it through something called teletown halls, where I can call out into the district. We usually try to tailor it to a certain region of the district, part of the district, because we don't want too many people on the line at once. And people can spend an hour or an hour and a half on the phone asking me questions and hearing my answers live. We don't get to everybody, but we try to choose representative issues. So if so that everybody at least hears me say something about a particular issue. And we hear from people who are happy, and we hear from people who want to be challenging, and I value that process.
That's so interesting, because if folks are watching the news, listening to the radio, they may think that it's all very arm's length and it's something that they just have to hear about third hand. But the reality is that it may be what you put into it is the information you might get back.
Well, new technology makes a lot possible, and we have to learn how to use it. So the teletown hall has been made more possible in recent years, where we have that opportunity. It's somewhat constrained, I think, by the fact that fewer people have held on to their landlines. So how we deal with that going forward, I think, in the political world in general, even as that question has come up around polling, how accurate is polling, because so many people no longer have landlines, and getting access to our phones, you know, our iPhones or whatever we may have is not as simple. But we try to get a representative group online, so that I hear, you know, the very disparate voices that people have around different things that we confront as a country. But it's great to have technology help us do that.
It's true.
Yeah.
I know that I appreciate the fact that you've made it incredibly easy for our state Senate office and the other members of the delegation to communicate with you and work together on our shared issues. And I think it's important, because a lot of these issues are not clearly federal, state, or local.
I always say that the federal government, each level of government has to be a strategic partner. We sort of have to understand where we can offer something that's very helpful to move things ahead. And it's not just government that has to be the partner, so the federal government, the state government, the local government, the private sector has to be a partner, and the nonprofit sector has to be a partner. And we all have strengths to bring to the table. And the more we can do that in concert with one another, the stronger we are as communities. And so it's great to see. It's great to work with you, or to work with Representative Dempsey, and to work with the Mayor Fiorentini on issues when there's something the federal government can do to help solve a problem. So, for example, as the new building has been going up along on the main street of Haverhill, there's a partnership there, and there was an issue that we had to help solve with the Corps of Engineers, and our office was happy to get engaged and make sure that some of their concerns did not become an obstacle to that building going forward. So that's what we try to do over and over and over again. Where there's an issue we find in which the federal government needs to be brought to the table, we work very hard to do that, and then to find a constructive solution to move forward. And that's really on the economic development side of things. But again, to get back to how we serve our constituents, and sometimes if you will get a constituent whose issue really is a federal issue, we're happy to work with that constituent and work with you, so that we get to a place where we've helped solve a problem that really makes a difference in somebody's life. So there are many, many ways in which we try to be helpful.
Those are really great examples. And I know how busy you are with all of your commitments and all of the communities that you have in the district. So I want to take this opportunity to truly thank you for making the time to talk about these things.
Happy to do it, and hope to do it again.
Thank you so much. We'll have you back on the show.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And I know that the representatives all appreciate it in the delegation for Haverhill.
Thank you.
So on that note, we thank you again for joining us on this very illuminating episode of Catching Up with Katy. We appreciate your support, and I always thank HC Media for creating this opportunity for us to talk about things happening on the local, state, and federal level. We hope that you'll join us for our next edition of Catching Up with Katy.